Hello everyone! Welcome to the Theories of International Relations course. We will continue with Chapter 4, Marxist Theory. In this chapter, we have 6 topics that we need to discuss. These are Classic Marxist Theory, Critics of Classic Marxism, Imperialism and its Critics, Neo-Marxism, Critics of Neo-Marxism, and the North-South Division. First, we should start with Classic Marxist Theory. Classic Marxist theory is essentially based on the evolution of capitalism and class conflict in the Western world. It is argued that the capitalism of 19th century in Europe emerged out of the earlier feudal system. In the capitalist system, private interests control labor and market exchanges. A clash inevitably arises between the controlling capitalist class and the controlled working class. Out of this clash, a new socialist order shall be born in the end. If we need to be more specific, Karl Marx tried to understand how the capitalist society works, how it arose out of feudalism, and where it is likely to lead. Concentrating on the social and economic relations in which people earn their livings, Marx saw behind capitalism a struggle of two main classes: the capitalists, who own the productive resources, and the workers or proletariat who sell their labor force to survive. There are actually 3 sub-theories of Marxism: the theory of alienation, the labor theory of value, and the materialist conception of history. All these must be understood within the context of capitalist infrastructure. Even Marx's vision of socialism emerges from his study of capitalism, since socialism is the unrealized potential inherent in the capitalist system itself. It is from the German philosopher George W. F. Hegel that Marx learned a way of thinking about the world called dialectics. However, unlike Hegel's dialectic, which operates essentially on ideas, Marx's dialectic is actually materialist. In this respect, Marx believes that the system of economic production determines the institutional and ideological structure of society. Whoever controls the economic system also controls the political system. Then there are the critics of classic Marxism. Classic Marxism has been subject to many criticisms, summarized as follows. First of all, it is argued that the class structure today is more complex than the capitalist workers or bourgeois proletariat distinction. Second, the capitalist structure today can be said to be less exploitative. Third, Marx argued that whoever controlled the means of production also controlled the economic infrastructure. Fourth, the Marxist hypothesis of the superstructure that is determined by the economic infrastructure controlled by the capitalists to create false consciousness is questionable. Fifth, in modern companies, there is less alienation as well. It's an undeniable fact that workers have a lot more to say through worker unions. Sixth, classic Marxist theory is too much deterministic. Marx argued that economic laws shape not only the society, but also the direction of history itself. Seventh, the socialist revolutions in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe did not lead to greater equality and freedom, as Marx would have hoped. Lastly, it is argued that Marx's grand theory is no longer relevant to today's more complex world affairs. Our next topic is imperialism and its critics. Marx foresaw the modern structure of capitalism as the final phase of capitalist order resulting from extreme concentration of capital. This was the starting point of the theory of imperialism taken by many Marxists, particularly John A. Hobson and Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Hobson argues that imperialism results from advanced capitalism producing an excess of capital unable to find any profitable outlet in the domestic economy. Hobson's theory of imperialism has had many criticisms, though. It was mentioned that the arguments of Hobson are rather superficial on the ground that basically they were strategic considerations and geopolitics that led to European expansion throughout the 19th century. Lenin also developed a theory of imperialism. Lenin's theory of imperialism revolves around the idea of systematic exploitation of poor economies by rich economies. Questions arise, however, as to whether the expanding tendencies of states can be reduced to the mere pursuit of economic interests or not. It was also criticized by arguing that it is the ruling classes, not the capitalists in any state, who take the decisions to go to war. Now we should move on to neo-Marxism. Neo-Marxism is not actually a theory on its own. Neo-Marxists consider themselves working within the Marxist intellectual tradition, but seek to broaden or revise Marxist thought to address topics not specifically addressed by Marx. For instance, neo-Marxists may offer an analysis of the state, economy, or politics that move beyond the simple infrastructure-superstructure interaction. They may combine classical Marxist analysis with forms of sociology, social psychology, or even feminism. Many neo-Marxists accuse the West that represents the world capitalist system of keeping underdeveloped countries in a position of subordination and dependence through limiting investments and bribing local elites. This thought became particularly crystallized in the writings of Antonio Gramsci. Gramsci developed the concept of cultural hegemony through which capitalism perpetuates itself. Cultural hegemony, in a generic sense, is the dominant ideology of the society that reflects the beliefs and interests of the ruling class. Like classic Marxism, neo-Marxism has also been subject to many criticisms. It is said that the neo-Marxists that blame the Western countries for the underdevelopment of less developed countries display a rather reductionist approach, oversimplifying the situation. Some other non-Marxist scholars similarly argue that there is not necessarily a positive relationship between underdevelopment and colonial past. If a country is poor and underdeveloped, that may be because of its internal dynamics, such as unsophisticated population, internal conflicts, lack of culture of democracy, frustration of basic human needs, and so on. Our final topic for today is the North-South division. The North-South division refers to the structural inequalities in the international economy. The North is roughly composed of developed Northern Hemisphere countries, while the South is comprised of underdeveloped or developing Third World countries. The origin of dividing countries into the North and South goes back to the Cold War years, in which countries were primarily categorized according to their alignment with the Soviet Union or the United States. This way, the United States and its allies were labeled as the First World or Western Bloc, and the Soviet Union and its allies as the Second World or Eastern Bloc. The North-South division is criticized for splitting the world and segregating people along economic lines. Many economists, from the liberal perspective, believe that free international trade and capital flows could eventually lead to a contraction in the North-South division. Neo-Marxists, on the other hand, are not really optimistic in this regard. In fact, they believe that free trade and flow of capital will widen the gap between developed and underdeveloped countries much further. Well, this is the end of our program for Chapter 4 of the Theories of International Relations course. Goodbye and see you in our next program, Chapter 5.